By the late 60s, international harvester tractors that looked identical were pulling harder and running cooler, but only some of them. The secret? Two nearly identical engines hiding one crucial difference. One was a dependable workhorse. The other was a quiet powerhouse farmers didn't see coming. The DT-361 wasn't just a turbocharged version of the D-361. It was purpose-built for forced induction from day one. While it shared a common 361 cubic inch foundation, including its 4.125-inch bore and 4.50-inch stroke, it incorporated significant reinforcements: a stronger block, upgraded pistons, refined cooling passages, and a balanced crankshaft, all designed to endure the sustained stress of turbocharging. First introduced in 1963 in the Farmall 806 and later used in the 856, the DT-361 became truly legendary with the 1965 Farmall 1206, the first Farmall to break the 100 horsepower barrier straight from the factory. For the 1206, IH didn't just bolt on a turbo. They partnered with their solar division to overhaul the engine. Oil-cooled twin-jet pistons, an expanded radiator, a larger oil cooler, and a 10-inch dual-element dry air cleaner became standard. Tight valve lash and calibrated turbo boost helped reduce lag and improve throttle response. They were set at 0.025 inches cold. The Elotherm hardened crankshaft, supported on 7 mains, stood up to the added torque. IH even beefed up the drivetrain, widening final drive gears by half an inch, upgrading bearings, so the 1206 could carry 98 horsepower to the drawbar. Early testing saw sidewalls buckle on conventional tires, so IH worked with tire makers to develop the 18.4 38 heavy-duty rear tire. Rated PTO horsepower remained in the 95 to 105 range, governed at 2,400 RPM. It held about 10 quarts of oil and 24 quarts of coolant. Bosch mechanical injection and a conservative Schwitzer turbo ensured field-serviceable fuel delivery and reliable low-end torque. Internal torque specs governed rod caps, mains, and head bolts in carefully sequenced passes, critical to withstand sustained boost. Even small deviations in torque angle or fastener tension could cause future failure, making precision assembly essential. A few years later, IH scaled this approach with the DT-407. Retaining the same stroke, they increased the bore to 4.321 inches, taking displacement to 407 cubic inches. Compression rose to about 16 to 1, and bigger turbos and reinforced blocks delivered 120 PTO horsepower in tractors like the 1256, and up to 130 in the 1456 and 66. The engine remained capped at 2,400 RPM, ensuring part commonality and service familiarity. Oil capacity increased to about 15 quarts, thanks to a larger sump and upgraded oil cooler, though coolant stayed the same at 24 quarts. Valve lash remained 0.025 inches cold. Dry sleeve construction continued, but with thicker liners and stiffer block castings to handle the added power. Sleeve installation tolerances stayed critical. Sleeves had to be pressed 0.40 to 0.45 inches above deck, or risk cracking and early failure under heat and pressure. Rebuilding these engines wasn't just a job, it was an art form. The sleeves had to fit just right, with mechanics carefully prepping the block, measuring sleeve height to a few thousandths of an inch, and sometimes even warming the engine to 150 degrees Fahrenheit to help things slide into place. Some went so far as to coat the sleeves in aluminum paint for a better grip. Done right, these engines ran forever. Done wrong, and you'd hear knocking after a few hundred hours. Cracked sleeves, scored pistons, maybe worse. Veteran rebuilders had their tricks too, like loosening the specs just a hair or opening up the ring gaps, all in the name of keeping these machines running strong in the dirt for years to come. Both engines share core traits: turbocharged inline-6 layout, Bosch mechanical injection, and dry sleeve rebuildability specific to their bore size. But IH wasn't just scaling displacement, they were solving problems. The DT-361 introduced reliable turbo power in a compact package. The DT-407 applied that power to bigger equipment, heavier soils, and larger implements, while still fitting in existing tractors and staying serviceable. Over time, IH expanded the DT-407's reach into models like the 1066, becoming the backbone of their mid to large tractor range and setting the stage for the legendary DT-466. But the legacy of these engines isn't just in specs, it's in real-world balance. Torque to move dirt, parts mechanics could fix, and systems that stood up to hard work. That innovation with purpose is why these engines remain fixtures at tractor pulls, restoration barns, and work sites across the country today. The 806 and later the 1206 earned their reputations with the DT-361 under the hood, and it was clear why. Drivers consistently praised how sharply the throttle responded and how well the engine handled row crop tasks. When the engines kicked in, they delivered usable torque right where it counted, perfect for planting or haying, where steady, efficient power was king. Operators appreciated that the engine didn't feel oversized or sluggish. Instead, it fit the task like a well-worn glove. Those trading up to the 1256 and 1456 discovered a different breed. Armed with the DT-407, these machines offered more bottom-end grunt and a higher torque plateau, making them suited to harder jobs like deep tillage and loader work. Plowing through heavy soil, carrying bulk materials, or even logging tasks, the DT-407 had the muscle to push longer and harder without faltering. Farmers reported noticeably deeper draft, which meant fewer engine drops and a more confident pull when the ground got tough. Plowing trials were particularly telling. Tractors with the DT-361 would sometimes lose steam in sticky spring soils or with big plow setups. Their operators often needed to downshift or slow the ground speed. In contrast, machines with DT-407s kept pulling at higher PTO settings, staying in gear longer under load. Some users noted the difference in fuel economy was minimal, even though the larger engine did more work, leaving farmers impressed by the value of the extra torque. That said, the DT-407 was not without quirks. Early versions could run hotter under sustained use, especially if installers reused the 361 scale cooling systems. There were occasional reports of injector nozzle glazing and slight hesitation on startup, often due to marginally higher internal pressures. But most issues were traced back to service routines. Proper coolant maintenance, suitable injectors, and occasional thermostat changes solved what few early adopters called first-generation turbo issues. Tires and drivelines also got a workout. During the 1206 development, IH's test crews found that standard rear tires of the appropriate size couldn't hold up to the torque. Sidewalls buckled and lugs spun off entirely. That led to the development and adoption of custom reinforced, heavy-duty versions of common tire sizes like the 18.4-38, a legacy still favored by pullers and restorers. Owners of DT-407 tractors often reported similar stress on front-end components during loader work, prompting upgrades to axles and steering links, but overall, these were minor tweaks compared to the robustness offered. One longtime owner shared how his 1256 with the 407 never backed down when pulling big wagons at harvest. He recalled choosing the DT-407 over a competitor simply because he knew it wouldn't quit halfway across the field. Another restored 856 owner told me the DT-361 never gave me a second thought. Just start up, punch in, and go. The contrast highlighted more than a difference in specs. It showed differences in confidence and trust. Fueling choices also tended to differ. DT-361 operators often stuck with diesel blends mixed from home tanks, appreciating that the engine was tolerant of small variations. DT-407 users learned to pay closer attention to injector quality and fuel condition, particularly for prolonged use. an extra step that gave better returns under heavy loads. Still, the effort paid off in increased uptime and reduced dropouts during PTO or drawbar tasks. On the PTO front, farmers running balers or augers loved the DT-361's snappy response but needed the DT-407 for larger loader tasks or larger PTO implements. A baler operator might get away with a DT-361, but a large cement mixer or six-bottom plow usually demanded the 407 to keep speeds consistent and engines cool. Looking at hours and longevity, DT-361 engines regularly clocked over 10,000 hours with only periodic adjustment, basic maintenance, and the occasional rebuild. DT-407 users who kept up with oil changes and sleeve fit checks reported similar lifespans, though they noted that maintenance windows were narrower. When things went wrong, they went wrong fast. That extra torque came with extra vigilance. In community gatherings, tractor pulls, vintage meets, swap meets, you'll often find both engine types celebrated. Enthusiasts bring out their 806s and 856s as examples of reliable workhorses that still impress. Owners of 1256s and 1456s just love pointing out the torque-to-the-ground capability of the DT-407, showing how these tractors outperform many newer machines. Either way, one sentiment is universal. They feel built to work. In short, the DT-361 brought turbocharged confidence to tractors without overwhelming them, offering a punchy but predictable experience. The DT-407 took things up a notch: more torque, more work capacity, and a clear path to heavier duty tasks. Both proved themselves under field conditions, but each appealed to different operators based on real-world demands. The story here isn't just about power numbers, it's about how those numbers translated into performance, feel, and reliability in fields across America. Maintaining a DT series engine was more than just routine upkeep. It was about respect and finesse. Owners of the DT-361 often found that simple, regular care went a long way. Checking oil levels, cleaning the air filter, and adjusting the clutch were everyday chores that kept the engine reliable, even through long planting or harvest seasons. The DT-407, however, demanded more attention. Owners had to stay ahead of higher heat and pressure. Clean fans and radiators, correct belt tension, and fresh coolant were critical. Overheating, failing injectors, and minor coolant leaks became noticeable quickly if systems weren't kept in check. Wear patterns spoke volumes. Missing a valve lash adjustment on a DT-407 could lead to head gasket failures or cracked heads. Failures rarely seen with the more tolerant DT-361. One mechanic said, "Skip an oil change or slip on coolant checks, and the 407 will remind you fast." That same leeway didn't apply to the 361. Rebuilding these engines became a hands-on lesson in precision. Mechanics learned to prepare counterbores, torque fasteners in sequence, and measure sleeve height carefully. One rebuilder's mantra: rise the block to around 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit before pressing sleeves. That way it seats just right once cooled. Such attention minimized failures and extended engine life. Sleeve installation errors had big consequences. A cracked flange could send metal shrapnel into the combustion chamber. Smart rebuilders began brushing sleeves with aluminum paint for better sealing, and using heavier-duty wrist pins for added durability in high-load uses, especially with the torque-heavy DT-407. Turbochargers and injectors also revealed weak spots. Turbo seals often showed wear first, so swapping in a fresh seal kit every 5,000 hours became routine. Injector nozzles were cleaned or replaced sooner on the 407, given the hotter combustion temperatures. Cooling system upkeep was a frequent shop task. Thermostat housing replacements were common. Many owners switched to billet units to prevent leaks. Hose clamps and upper radiator hoses were checked weekly during harvest, particularly on tractors that ran all day in dusty conditions. When things went sideways, mechanics were ready. A DT-407 rebuild was undone after 250 hours of operation when a cracked sleeve flange caused oil-starved damage. Repair costs far exceeded what a preventative rebuild would have cost. Veteran rebuilders say this story reminded new mechanics that torque and power require torque wrench discipline. The aftermarket responded. Sleeves with improved sealing O-rings prevented coolant creep. Lightweight performance injectors boosted low-end throttle response. Billet thermostat housings held up better in stress zones, saving hassles during peak seasons. Just when the 361 and 407 should have been headed for retirement, something strange happened. They didn't go away. These engines remained in the fields, not just because of nostalgia, but because they kept starting, pulling, and getting the job done. Mechanics trusted them, farmers relied on them, and even as newer engines came to market, the old IH block still rumbled through seasons like they were built yesterday. Their long-term reputation came down to two things: simplicity and serviceability. With mechanical injection, dry sleeves, and rugged castings, these engines could be rebuilt in frame with tools you'd find in most farm shops. Parts were available too. By the 1980s and 90s, a healthy aftermarket had sprung up around international diesels, especially for high-wear components. Injectors, sleeves, pistons, bearings, all easy to find and fairly priced. That kept the 806s, 856s, 1256s, and 1456s running decades longer than their designers might have imagined. The 361 in particular became a fan favorite among smaller operations. It had enough power to handle row crop work, enough torque to pull a few plows, and a reputation for starting even in cold Midwestern winters. And when something wore out, it could be rebuilt in a weekend, often without pulling the engine. Owners shared stories of crossing 10,000 hours on the original block, with just one or two top-end rebuilds along the way. No drama, no failures, just routine service and smart operation. The DT-407 earned a different kind of loyalty. This was the engine you turned to when you wanted more. More grunt, more headroom, more confidence in the toughest jobs. While it demanded a bit more attention to valve lash and sleeve fit, it paid you back with field-stretching durability. When tuned right and cooled properly, it could last just as long as its smaller sibling. It's no surprise, then, that many farmers viewed the DT-466, launched in 1971, as a logical next step. With a wet sleeve design, a heavier block, and more displacement, it introduced big engine serviceability to the mid-duty market. The 466 didn't evolve directly from the 361 or 407. It was a next-generation design that incorporated lessons and carried the IH diesel philosophy forward. But what made it iconic was how it echoed those earlier engines. User-serviceable, tough as nails, and long-lived. It didn't replace the legacy of the 361 and 407. It built upon it. Still, ask any seasoned IH mechanic and they'll tell you, the older engines had a charm that specs don't capture. The DT-361's sharp throttle. The DT-407's growl under load. The way a 1256 felt glued to the soil when the torque curve flattened out and the plow just kept cutting. Today, that story isn't over. These engines still appear at vintage tractor pulls, show up in classified ads as field-ready, and earn quiet respect from younger mechanics who weren't even born when they were built. Their survival isn't an accident. It's a testament to purpose-driven engineering and the people who kept them alive.